Welcome to another episode of The Power of Your Story, a space for people to share their story, learn from their story, and empower others through their story. First of all, yesterday we were supposed to have a conversation with Thomas, but due to some rather unforeseen circumstances here in Austin, Texas, and that is me waking up to a foot of snow and no power, our reschedule had to happen. So that conversation would take place at a later date. Today's guest is someone that I wanted to bring on for a while. Her name is Laura Staley. Her and I have been connected for probably closer to a year by now, maybe even over that. And one of the other things that we're involved in is a call on Saturday morning. It's called Courageous Conversations, where we discuss a topic at hand, oftentimes a topic that's relevant to our lives, and we have a conversation through which we're able to shift our own perspectives by listening to others. And so I wanted to have her on the show to talk about the topic that you're able to see above, which is what does it mean to be in denial? What does it mean to be in denial when it comes to being in relationships and many other forms? And with that said, please welcome her onto the show. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, Oleg.
No, thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. And I think more importantly, thank you for being a part of my life. And I know that you're one of the early people that have been a part of those Saturday calls. And, it's always a joy to have you there. I think the insights and the perspectives that you bring, I know that I walk away every single time, even though I walk into it with a question, I walk away with significantly more questions than I began to begin with.
I do too.
But I think that's kind of the beauty of it. And, just being a part of an open space like that, where you can openly hear other people's perspectives and know that at the end of the day, your perspective is only your perspective. And it's not necessarily the way to living life, rather it's just a way. And so hearing all these other people, John Jefferson, Scott Mason, Lachelle, it just makes me realize that, wow, it really is just like a speck when it's compared to a larger scope of things, because you and I can talk about the same thing, even the concept of denial, and have two very different perspectives because we have very different experiences.
Absolutely. Well, and as I was reflecting on this question when you sent it to me yesterday, I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many different ways to come at this.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, well, probably the best way to come at it is, through my own experiences and relationships with others, as you pointed to in the introduction, because, oh my goodness, I even got thinking about, there are probably people that might still believe the earth is flat, right? And it's like, okay, most of us would probably go, well, yeah, that's a bit of a form of a denial, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if somebody chooses to operate their life that way, I think as long as it's kind of not hurting me, they have the freedom to have that thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all have so many different beliefs and experiences, like you said. And I think how I came to this idea, if I can just go ahead and jump in, shall I just go ahead and jump
Absolutely.
in? Okay. Wow. So I grew up with the dynamics of a significant person in my life who so quickly could shapeshift. And this individual could be incredibly kind and syrupy sweet, and then on a dime just be ferocious and angry. And I remember I'm okay with saying it. It was my mom, and she has since passed. And I have a richer understanding of the struggles that she has and or had, and huge compassion for what she had unresolved. But I remember as a little girl, because I was the split all bad kid in the family. Like, my brother was the golden child, I was the scapegoat. And I just so remember going to her and saying things like, why are you so angry? And, why did you say those things? You sounded so angry and mean. And she was like, I was joking, and I was just kidding, or I didn't say that. and it got so confusing as a little girl. And I found I had to, I got hyper vigilant about kind of like tracking with her, like, oh man, when is she gonna, when's the next time she's gonna blow, right? And then her capacity to even throw it back at me was, in my experience and later on in my learnings, I realized, wow, that was just another form of her projecting onto me the things that she didn't want to see inside of herself, and said things, described me in ways that were really quite, unfortunately, really quite cruel. Although I've come to terms with that, she loved me as best as she could. And I'm grateful for that. I had a roof over my house. I had food. We were a middle class family, and yet there were these really, really scary, challenging dynamics. And so tracking the emotional realities became very challenging for me, Oleg, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if somebody's saying, I'm not angry, and they're like, ah, or somebody else, or they're just going, I'm fine, right? I learned to not always listen to the words. I mean, I would want to listen to somebody's words, right? But what I learned to drop into, and I think it served me in my life because, I've survived a lot of things and I've come through a lot of things, is that I learned to drop into that deeper paying attention to the emotional world and energy of a person and their presence, because somebody can look from a distance, can look really innocuous, but you get up close and you stand next to them and you're like, whoa, like
Mm-hmm.
I would. And I'd be like, man, there is like hostility just, wafting off of this individual, even though from a distance they look innocuous. I mean, another example is kind of like, um, my mom actually did hug me, but she often said really cruel words in my ear as she was hugging me, right? And so it became this mixed message, because to the outer world, they're looking and seeing, probably having the interpretation, wow, that's a really loving mother. And yet
Mm-hmm.
my experience was terrifying and uncomfortable, and just like, get, get me out of here, because it was like the hug that's stabbing you in the back, if you, so to speak, right, with the mean words. So that mixed message had me kind of go to work at tracking emotional realities, behaviors, and less about words if it felt like something was off. So if there wasn't alignment between words, feelings, and behavior, and kind of presence and an energy, because some of the coolest people I've met, complete strangers, right? They may be dressed in a very different way than I'm dressed, right? And they may even smell, and yet I will experience this energy from that person that's, like, it has me curious, because there's this gentleness, there's this humility, there's this humbleness, and I'm curious about their story. And then I strike up a conversation, they start to smile, they get animated. I'm actually listening and hearing them. And this whole being emerges, right? Um, Now, in terms of my own denial, and this is
Mm-hmm.
where it gets really interesting, right? Okay, so I had these, confusing, that's a great word to use, really confusing, terrifying experiences, right? With kind of a shape shifting, um, mom who could, be screaming at us kids and answer the phone and go, hello, right? And I would be just like, how can she do that? How can she just like shift on a dime like that? I mean, I hardly, like, I can laugh and laugh and laugh, and I don't know how to shift out of laughing into anger. I don't know. Um, but so one of the things that I struggled with is, I swallowed the beliefs the ways that she and other people, it wasn't just her, but other people,
Mm.
bullies at school and things, way they described me, right? So inside, I had this idea of myself that wasn't flattering at all, right? And it filled me with so much shame. And but watch this, right? So I'm walking around internally with all this shame, but externally, oh my gosh, I want everybody, anyone, someone, you, Oleg, please love me, right? And
Mhm.
so if I could just be good and kind and behave well and do the exact right, perfect thing, right? So I became this fierce, do-gooder, people pleaser. I mean, there are all kinds of words for it, and yet inside, feeling so terrified, right, and ashamed of these things that, oh God, if you found out, Oleg, that I really, really am a big piece of poo, right? You'd run so far away from me. So I got in what many people now call kind of an imposter syndrome. I mean,
Mhm.
I had it going on in spades, right? The hustle for the, and I could say, I would attempt to say exactly what you wanted to hear. And I lost who the heck I was, until it got so exhausting and uncomfortable. And then I began doing my work, and I really had truly convinced myself that I was this good, kind, loving person. Now, I do think that is my essence, right? But oops, guess what? I put myself in a transformational workshop, and I also knew that I had patterns in me that were just not working, right?
Mhm.
I guess I just didn't want to live terrified. At the same time, I'm like, doing the dog and pony show out here, right? And inside, I'm just terrified of life, of people, of experiences. Are they going to find? Like seriously, are they going to find out that I have no right to exist, right? And just take me out. Um, Plus, when I was really, really little, I literally had my life threatened. So that just was another added layer of terror. And the individual said, if you tell, I'll kill you. So so it was like, oh my God, I can't talk, even though I had one brief moment where I said it, but then it was denied, right? My mother literally said, there is no bad man at your school. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
can't talk about that, right? So another, bearing the things that had actually happened. So I knew that these things, the experiences all live in your body, or they all live in my body. I'll speak for me. And I started my work, and I'll never forget the woman who came to me and was like, uh, and I had asked for this. I really had asked for honest feedback. And she said, Laura, you know that you interrupt people. And I was so taken aback because I had convinced myself that I was a really, really good listener. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? In that kind, people pleasing, I'm a really good listener. And here's this little feedback, right, that enters in. And I felt all kinds of feelings. And then in the kind of the squeaky voice, I was like, really? And she goes, yes, you do. And I started to look. I started to actually pay attention in all kinds of conversations. And I saw that I absolutely interrupted people. I had
Mm.
hot potato, ideas in my head, and no internal editor sometimes, and it all will come flying out my mouth. Right? And so it was this both and tension in my experience of going, okay, when people are telling me a story, I really do listen. And I remember vivid details about exactly what they said. That was accurate. And it was also accurate that I interrupted people. And this thing over here, right? I didn't like this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to like stop this one, the interrupter lady. Uh, and so I actually went to work on that. And there are times that we literally have to interrupt people, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of behavior, like, well, like I need a bio break,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you'd be like, cool, Laura, and I wish you had done it before the podcast, in a conversation with a friend or whatever, and I'm sitting and having coffee, I'll just like hold that thought. I really want to hear everything you have to say, but I really need a bio break. Right. So it's not that I had to go to some extreme and never, ever, ever interrupt another human being as they were talking. But there are ways that I could do it that are respectful and integrated with my deepest core values. The other example of kind of like so any rate, that tension of the both
Mm-hmm.
and beginning to look at all the ways that I was interacting with people in my life was really, really important to me, and especially the people closest to me. Because I think what is that? I don't know, but maybe because I had learned it in my own family that when you go out in the world, you put on your best behavior, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your smiley face, your curtsy, your bow, you know how to shake hands, but back in the house, all heck could break loose, right? And what is that? It's almost like, uh, the people that you love the most, you would hope that you would behave and model behavior that had you at your highest and best, if you will, or you could be genuine without being cruel, right? I can
Yeah.
be honest and own I'm tired, I'm sad, I've got a headache, and be able to communicate those things, or I need a timeout, or I need to take care of these things that are internal to my boat, and it has nothing to do with you. I've just got to go work at me and then take myself on a timeout and go to work on whatever it is that I'm resolving internally to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So the other example that I would share, and then please jump in,
Mm-hmm.
just because this really was life changing. I had anger outbursts with my two little kids. Like, it wasn't a denial, but I also was really struggling to interrupt it. And I sort of mostly wanted to hide it from everybody. Like most people who knew me, they couldn't imagine the salty sailor words that would come out of me. Now, I didn't call my kids names, but how I would describe it is I would just lose it, right? I would just like have an adult tantrum, in front of them. So many triggers and so much unresolved trauma. Any rate, my then husband came to me and really did give me a really great gift, and I'm grateful to this moment in this conversation. He said, in a moment of calm, those episodes that you have, they really scare me, but they're terrifying our children. Now, remember, Oleg, I felt terrified in my childhood household. And here I'm having to confront the reality that hurt people, right? That I had recreated the very experience that I hated the most
Mm-hmm.
inside the bodies and beings of my two little kids. And, at first I was like, well, I got defensive. I really did.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, they need to see what anger looks like. Really? Like that? Really? And as I reflected more about it, because they truly were really little kids, I thought, wow, wait a minute. Only cowards or emotionally unregulated people, or just wounded. I mean, I had so much trauma lodged in my nervous system that hadn't resolved itself. Um, And so the very next time I literally, I'm in the episode, right? It'd been a long day, and I had the moment where it's still really kind of emotional for me, where the veil lifted, right? And because I'm in my, and I intellectually could describe these episodes, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't able to interrupt them or thwart them or stuff them away. And it's like I opened my eyes and saw my kids terrified selves, sitting kind of like stones on the floor. And I ran into the bedroom, awash with so much shame, um, and called the next day to do my deeper work so I wouldn't be repeating that cycle with my kids. So at that juncture, I could no longer deny our topic for today, deny that as much as I was fiercely committed to being this loving, patient, kind, gentle, compassionate person, I behaved at times, not all the time, at times with my own two small children, as I've described her. I called her Lois, um, as a psycho bitch from hell, and that was so utterly painful. And again, I was in a both and of I had cultivated a lot of ways of being that were loving and compassionate and kind. And then I also had sort of the fake kind, people pleasing things still going on. And then I had this psycho freak, right? Who, when I got triggered, and my kids were just being kids. I mean, I hardly, maybe we were just at a shopping mall and I was like overly stimulated or scared that my mother was going to come over to the house. And it just, I felt stalked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I literally felt stalked by I know that's really strange, probably strange for some people to hear who have a very deeply loving relationship with their mother. But in my experience, I literally felt stalked by my mom, because anytime she showed up in my energy field, I could count on it going from, it was the "I hate you, don't leave me," right?
Mm-hmm.
She'd have something syrupy, fake kind to say to kind of draw me back in, and then just pound me with, brutal words,
Mm-hmm.
that, I don't need to repeat. So I went to work on the integration and the healing of those traumas so that I personally would have the awareness to feel those sensations in my body and go back and be able to cut the wire before all the stuff came out of my mouth. And I'm here my life is a demonstration that you can absolutely come through. I know there's a lot of talk about the growth mindset, post-traumatic growth. I'm a living example of that. I know that this isolation and the pandemic, et cetera, has us really with an opportunity, which I've been doing pretty much most of my life once I got aware, really, really deeply aware of this thing called denial, to do the introspection and really ask myself those questions. Is it true? Is it absolutely true? What do I feel like when I have that thought? And then, kind of turn it around. So anything that I've ever judged in somebody else, I got going on.
Reflection of you. Yeah.
Like that's what I've learned. Like every single time I would think somebody was behaving whatever, I now know to ask myself that deeper question and say, what has this person lived through that has them behaving that way?
Yeah.
And then how can I be of support? So for instance, if it's a mom in a line well, I know we're not in too many lines these days, but I'll just jump back. You know, there was a woman,
6 feet apart lines, those still do
yeah,
exist,
exactly 6 feet apart lines. But there was a time that, you know, I took my kids to the zoo, and there's a story. I tell the story. I tell these stories, by the way, and Live Inspired. I actually tell the story of what that experience was like for me when I was losing it with my kids, but then also waking up to the fact that, wow, I needed to go to work on that behavior. But there was a woman at the zoo who she was losing it, you know,
Mhm.
whacking her kid and this little boy, and she was really tall, and of course it's like this little boy, and he's just reaching up. What I saw is that he was reaching up for the beverage. It was this really hot summer day, and she just kept screaming at him and, you know, whacking him, and I now know the question I could have asked. I just said, can I help you, which just had her swear up a storm at me. But she started focusing on me, and I was seriously distanced from her because she,
Mhm.
you know, I didn't want to get in the fray, but I really did. But what I ended up saying, because she was like swearing, but she was like mimicking me. She was like doing the screaming active listening, which is kind of cool, right? Because she had stopped hitting this child. And I just said, yes, you know, can I help you? Because I know what it feels like to be that enraged. Now I didn't hit my kids, but I would have these meltdowns. One time, I swatted the bottom of my daughter, and it's terrified me, and I completely, you know, stopped that behavior because it was not aligned with my values. Plus, I was listening to a friend yesterday whose son, she had been spanked as a child, and her son, when he had gotten in trouble at school for hitting a kid, and she went to go and hit him, and he goes, "Wait, why is it that you get to hit me when I just hit a kid?"
Mhm.
And it, you know, like it stopped her cold in her tracks, right? To just kind of like, wow, okay. And the new question I think I would ask somebody is, how can I help? How can
Yeah.
I help? If somebody's really having that, you know, meltdown moment, how can I help? Uh, and you know, maybe they'd say something, or maybe they wouldn't, but I know my compassion is huge, because I know denial can be so multifaceted.
Oh, yeah.
There can be so many things, Oleg, that people want to hide. They want to hide that they were sexually molested. They want to hide that they had horrible parents. They want to hide the fact that, you know, they flunked algebra. They want to hide, you know, like right. There's just like a plethora of things that we want to hide away in a closet. And yet, what I've learned is when I can open that closet of my own life experiences and own every single thing that ever happened to me, I can learn from everything that happened to me. And rather than internalize the shame of the perpetrator, if you will, and I don't particularly like calling my mom that, but in many ways she was, and in another reality, um, you know, I could have gotten into foster care or something. I mean, there was, you know, but that time period, you know, I didn't go, who was I going to tell?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there was no one to tell. And so, you know, no one else was bearing witness. No one else was saying. In fact, they were all like, yeah, Laura, you're the problem. You know, if
Mhm.
you just like straighten up your act, she wouldn't behave so badly towards you. And so it got reinforced, you know, by the entire family. Like, you need to apologize to your mom. And I was like, wow, really? What did I do? You
Mhm.
know, and I wasn't perfect, because sometimes I did push back, right? Sometimes I just did yell back and blow up, but part of that was my own survival mechanism. But I've learned to walk away if it gets that. Um, yeah, I've learned to hold my tongue is what I've learned. But I've also learned to speak up when I know that my words could make a difference. So just another example of that, there's a lady who I run a few laps with, and she has a dog that's very badly behaved with other dogs, and it hates this one little dog. And I had the presence of mind to, yeah, as soon as this dog broke loose the other day and went barreling towards the tiny dog, and the tiny dog was walking with its owners. I knew their names, and they're really kind people. And it's not that this woman isn't kind, but she's complicated, right? And the way she treats her dog is not something that I would do or choose. And yet, I might be able to say, well, that's kind of a form of denial, that she's denying how she yells at her dog and threatens her dog and grabs her dog, and like does behaviors that kind of scare me for the dog, right? And yet I have never said anything because it's complicated, and in many ways she is a good, kind person. But I think when we go binary, it gets really, that's where we get all messed up, because she's many things, right? She's just
Yeah.
many things, like I am too, right? And put me in a horrible context, and you're going to see one heck of a, excuse me, this
Yeah.
other being that, wow, she's dropping the F-bomb like crazy, and she's just like fighting for her life, and she's like, oh my God, Laura's behaving like a cornered animal. And it's like, yeah. So anyway, the dog takes off, and I yelled the man's name, and I just said, his name and dog. And he scooped up this tiny little dog, and in the meantime, the other dog, and she was focused on her dog and yelling at her dog, not realizing the larger context. And I was able to pay attention from that wider lens. And I'm grateful, because the small dog, the dog was just barking and jumping on the gentleman, and he's like, his whole shoulders are hunched, and he's kind of, trying to protect his tiny dog. And I'm just grateful that that tiny dog didn't, get bitten or mauled by this other dog. Um, and yet, it's one of those life situations that she's not asking me, right? The woman,
Correct.
the owner of the dog, she's not coming to me and saying, gosh, my dog has bitten me. It's done this, it's done that. What can I do?
Or even
Oh,
behavioral problems, like, because not every dog acts the same exact way. Like, I
exactly.
mean, everything you're saying I can relate to.
Yeah.
With my dog, man, it took me a while. So there are two denials that I was facing. One
Yeah.
was when I had first got my dog, and this didn't necessarily stem from my parents, but more so, I think, just the treatment that I saw of other dogs, and also my own personal experience of how I was taught discipline.
Mm.
Like with my dog, whenever he would do certain things that I thought was out of the ordinary,
Yeah.
which really was just, he was just living his life and I was living mine.
Yeah.
And the two of us, because he doesn't speak English well, there's a bit of a disconnect that happens.
Yeah.
But I remember at the very early stages, like, one of the things that he did was when I would come home, and let's say I'm 2 or 3 hours late or later than expected, and he would sometimes like pee on the carpet or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
By no means his fault, because if he could use the bath. If he truly could, he would use the bathroom,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
Absolutely.
he can't. He doesn't have the same
Right.
ability as we do to be able to do that. And
Right.
so I would get mad at him, and I would go to the carpet and say, "No, don't do this," and like scald him. And then after a while, I just realized, it's like, why am I doing this?
Mm.
But a lot of that came from denial. Like, I was denying the fact that I was actually using anger
Mm.
to autocorrect his behavior, when
Mm.
the reality of the matter was the same exact thing could be done just through soft-spoken words,
Mm.
or without having to show my finger and say, no, no, don't do this.
Mm.
And I realized that after a while, my relationship with him changed completely.
Yeah.
Like, now we're able to have, literally, sometimes, just if I say, Caleb, stop, he
Mm.
just walks away. He
Mm.
lays down. Or I no longer have to say, don't do this or don't do that.
Mm.
Which, by the way, were my lessons to learn. Like, I
Yes.
was the one that showed up 3 hours late, not him. So, I
Right.
mean, I could imagine if someone else who was responsible for letting me to go to the bathroom showed up 3 hours late, like, I probably would do even. I know dogs that do that, like, on people's beds,
Yeah.
just as a sign that, hey, this is what happens if you don't let me out.
right?
Like I have to go. And so I think much of what you're saying I can relate to. Tabitha Donald joined us as well. She said, she has similar issues. She can relate to much of that story. But the other thing that I'm curious about as you were talking about all this is, do you find this to be a personal responsibility that you choose to accept? So, for example, like you go to a dog park, and let's say a dog is not behaving up to your standards or as well as your dog. And because I struggle with this sometimes, I'll take the dog for a walk, and then some people, they like to let the dogs off leash. I never know how the dogs are going to react.
Mm.
I always kind of give benefit of the doubt, but there are times where I feel fear for my dog, especially if it's a significantly bigger dog. And I think part of that is just the conditioning. The bigger, the worse the consequences and all this other stuff when it doesn't always correlate like that. But I choose to accept the responsibility on my end. And that is, I will actually signal the owner and say, hey, is it friendly? Or I choose to do another form of action. And that is walk the opposite direction. In your case, when you see someone in denial of their own behavior,
Mm.
do you accept that as your personal responsibility? And then do you try and
Mm.
correct them or like
I
help them see differently? Like, how do you approach situations like that?
Well, I mean, going back to the example of the woman at the zoo. So, well, it's interesting. I have a couple of stories.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I now know that it's much more supportive of people, honestly. Because if I were having a meltdown and somebody said, "Can I help you?" I
Mm-hmm.
would feel more shame and probably lash out, just like she did, right? But how can I help?
And is that because the first question points out that there's something like there's a problem? Is that way it
Yeah,
makes you feel that way?
or almost like, "Can I help you?" also implies that I know better than you.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
equal. I'm not an equal with you. When the reality is, okay, I didn't hit my kids, but I screamed salty sailor, in the privacy of my home. I didn't do it publicly,
Mm-hmm.
but that didn't make it any better, right? Um, And so when I've seen that, and each situation is different, Oleg, honestly. There's some situations that I've just chosen to walk away. And because it just seems that it's my presence, however I would presence myself,
Mm-hmm.
will make the situation worse. And I work to trust my gut on that. But there was one situation that my kids remember to this day. I don't know if they remember the lady at the zoo. They might. I was pulling them in a red wagon, but we were at such a distance, and it was a hot day, and they may have been focused on their snacks and their drinks after the hot day at the zoo. But we had stopped at a rest stop. This was okay. Kids are older, on a driving trip, and I noticed this dad just drill sergeanting his kid, screaming at him, and he's got one really little kid, and the kid is screaming and crying, and he's got him, gripped by the arm, fierce, just, and I was like, okay, that kid is physically being hurt, right? And
Mm-hmm.
these other boys are being screamed at to get down and do push-ups and sit-ups and all this kind of stuff. And I had gotten out of the car and I was doing yoga poses because I had been driving for a while, and I'm witnessing this. And all I did was walk over and join the two boys on the ground and talking to them and going, "You can do this. I got this." And I started doing whatever the dad was screaming at them
Mm-hmm.
to do. I joined them. I joined them, and of course, there's this moment, right? Because I'm a witness now, right? And the dad, loosens his grip on the one boy, and the boy is just like the one who he had been, holding really, really tight in the arm. is just staring at me and, one of those, right? Because he had been crying so hard, but his dad has now released his grip. And I've just full on joined in. I'm doing the burpees, whatever, right? The push-ups. And I'm just sort of whispering to the two boys, kind of like, I don't know. I'm not remembering exactly what I said, but something, like encouraging. Sort of like, I know this world. I know what it's like to be with a badly behaved adult who's, just off the rails and making demands on you. And I'm just going to join you and in that camaraderie. And of course, all the people in the van, the mothers and whoever else was traveling with this gentleman and these three boys were just, again, everybody's like staring, just like agog, like, who is she? Where'd she come from? Right. And then, within a few minutes, the dad had calmed down, and I just hopped up and walked away. And I didn't say a word to the dad. And I've thought back that maybe I could just, could have said something like, parenting is really hard, which it is, and so that, I didn't want him to feel judged by me because I know how hard it is. But I also didn't necessarily want his rage coming directed at me. I just wasn't in a place to have that experience. So I focused on the children. But the woman, my dear friend who was interviewed and talked about being in line at Walmart and asking a woman who was really struggling with her child, how can I help? The woman just said, yes, take this child. And so my friend scooped up the child and, and then offered to get her a cup of coffee. And of course, then the woman just tears streaming down her face, and yes, that would be so kind, and and then heard the whole story, right? And she just played with the child, got her keys out, and and the child calmed down. She gave safe space for this woman to just grieve. And it turned out that she was alone and didn't have a whole lot of support, and all those kinds of things. And yet it was a complete stranger. And I love that story because these stories of compassion, right? Because that's really what it is letting people know that I'm there, knowing what it's like to be that stressed out and that enraged with young children. But I also found a different way. I found different ways, and maybe it's out of my fierce commitment to children that nobody. No, I've learned I don't have to apologize for tears, but I don't want children to live what I lived. I don't. And so if there's something I can do from a place of compassion to shift the energy and maybe offer an insight if they're looking for it. But a lot of people aren't necessarily looking for it or want it. They'll be like, it's none of your business. And I think that's why the difference between can I help you? Because then it's like, it's none of your business to how, and you shift it to how can I help you? Then it's like, it kind of is like, whoa, well, maybe this person could carry my groceries while I'm struggling with this squalling toddler in my arms, right?
Yeah.
And that'll help me calm down. And, but having that energy, because what I've gone to work on, Oleg, is no longer being in denial about any of my behaviors. Like the self-awareness is like this.
Oh yeah.
Like my bandwidth is huge. Like I know my arms are up in the air waving right now, right?
Yeah.
I know I have deep presence and awareness, and that's the great news about doing the work of healing and transformation and getting yourself aligned. And I'm nowhere perfect, but I'm whole and I'm real and I'm genuine and I lead from my heart. And that I know for sure. Like I'll drop down into my deepest core values and lead and live my life from there. So yeah, and sometimes it makes it's made my children sometimes really uncomfortable when I've just gently stood and walked over into a situation that's volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my daughter in particular gets scared for me, and yet I know myself. I know what I lived through, and I know what I can bring, and it's usually a gentle, compassionate presence rather than judgment. Because I know the last thing I wanted is to somebody to come in and see me on that worst moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
My then husband already called me out, right? Which was such a uncomfortable moment, and yet it was absolutely accurate. And on some level he knew I was bigger than my cruel behavior. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say it that way. Or he knew that I had work to do to resolve all that trauma from my past. Yeah, because my kids aren't to blame for things that happened 20 years ago, right? I mean, oh my gosh, why am I taking out my stuff on them? And yet that's the ancestral pattern, right? If you feel so powerless and dehumanized and you don't know a different way, you're going to do you're going to give as good as you got. And
Yeah, it's
yet,
a never-ending cycle.
yeah, right, exactly.
Same cycle that just repeats itself.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, the hurt people will hurt people
yeah.
until you know a different way. Because I think most people, they do want to, they are, deep inside, they know that they're capable of love. They're capable of compassion. They're capable of courage. And I'll tell you, it takes great courage to come out of denial. In fact, I think some people might rather prefer to go on a public speaking tour for a whole year than pierce their own denials about behaviors or words they're using or ways that they're interacting with the people that they love the most.
Yeah.
Right? You know?
Laura, do you have any of stories like that? I mean, obviously this is a loaded topic, so we can literally just pick a subcategory and go with it. Denial in relationship, denial of self, denial of goals. Do
Yeah.
you have any of stories like that shared in any of the books? I know that's something mentioned, and I'll put it on the bottom for those that are tuned in right
Oh,
now.
absolutely. I would actually say, stories for sure, and Live Inspired and in
Mm-hmm.
Courageously. Yeah, I mean, I tell on myself throughout the entire book of Live Inspired. I mean, and the wisdom gleaned all along the way. I mean, it's so funny because there are times that, our culture is be like, oh, be a rock star and be a badass. And, all these superlatives, you got to be, live your best life. And it's like, you know what? I'm human, and I can be a dumb A. I can be a smart A. A whole lot of things. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell on myself, I do, because it's, I learn the most when people are real with me. And I was so happy when this guru type person, it was the first time I read one of his newsletters. It was Wayne Dyer, and he has since passed away. But I remember putting him up on a pedestal and thinking, man, he's got it all together. Like, he's like perfect. And yet here he opened with, I've been in bed for 3 days. And I was like, oh, what? Because he was grieving the end of his marriage. And I was like, wait, he's human? You
That's a funny moment when you find out,
know? Oh
people that
God.
you look up to. It's like, oh wow,
Yeah.
they go through the same exact stuff that we do.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and I think it's just been really, really important to me, Oleg, to be honest, and maybe radical honesty is part of my brand, because if you can't know my heart and what I've lived through and what I've learned, then why in the heck would you ever share your life story
Trust you,
with
yeah.
me, or
Hmm.
trust me with your hard things, right? And I'm proud of the fact that even when I was a little girl, people felt so safe to tell me their stories. They just, I mean, complete strangers. And my kids have been like, "Man, mom, you like you don't have a sign on your head, and yet there's something about you that people feel so safe to tell you their breakup stories, in the checkout line at Target, and I'm buying greeting cards, and here's the clerk telling me your breakup story, and my daughter's just looking at me like, man,
What's going on?
it's not my mom. What is it? But I want to be a safe harbor for people. People are living through a lot right now, especially right now, if not before the pandemic. And I know what it's meant to me to have safe harbor people who kept loving me and believing in me, even when I was at my worst, right? When I was doing not great behaviors. There were certain people who just kept loving me and believing in me. And it makes all the difference, because then you
Hmm.
can kind of like accept that you've behaved badly, forgive yourself, and you have that change behavior be your best apology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, what's the best way that people can connect with you? I know that you mentioned websites, one of them. I have it here at the bottom. Any other way, like LinkedIn, Facebook, any other platforms that you use on a regular basis?
Absolutely. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, but I haven't totally figured out how to use it. I know how to post pictures and videos, but yeah.
That's the main job of it, so you know how to do
Okay. That's good
that.
to know. But yeah, people can reach out to me also at Laura@cherishyourworld.com. I'd be honored to connect and engage a conversation. And I know I think Live Inspired, if people have been intrigued by the discussion today, I think that book may be a really valuable um, resource, and um, yeah, to those who would be interested in personal growth and self discovery, and somebody who's willing to be radically honest about my blunders
That's
and what
awesome.
I've learned from them, importantly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think because that's an important lesson, and that was one of the things that I was going to mention, towards the end is first, for anyone that's listening, if you found value in this show, please feel free to leave your comments, review, whatever it is through our Facebook and LinkedIn. But outside of that, just having the ability to reflect upon your experience and learn the takeaways, learn the lessons, because I think that is that's something I tie to this topic of denial, reliving the same story, reliving the same narrative, and thinking that why is it happening or why is it happening again? When the reality of the matter is maybe one of the reasons why it's happening is because I haven't learned a lesson. I haven't asked myself the question of what is this here to truly teach me? What am I here to learn? I've gone, yeah, that's a topic for another conversation, but I've gone through so many experiences and events throughout my life where I've asked myself the same question. And then I started to realize that unless I start to document, which you have, through many of these books, it's like the story doesn't change. The narrative remains the same exact thing. And then it's the same exact cycle over and over and over again. And for me, there just became a point where, just in all honesty, I got tired of it. I got tired of living the same exact cycle. And I faced the honest truth that I said, hey, I'm tired of repeating the same story. I'm tired of repeating the same behaviors. The whole story of my dog. Like, how long do I want to repeat that when there are other ways that I can learn to communicate? Now, don't get me wrong, none of this happens overnight. For me, none of it happened overnight. It took years of reminders, and I'm sure I still mess up, you know,
Yep.
however many years down the road. But I think for me, what I find valuable is, am I willing to try?
Yeah.
And that's where I think everything changes.
Oh, so, yeah, that's definitely been my experience, and it definitely is not overnight. But yeah, I think in my case, I got tired of being terrified. I didn't want to live terrified and unworthy. I wanted to feel safe in my body and joy, right? Yeah, but
Awesome.
it's a process. So,
Hmm.
no, well, thank you. Well, I don't know if you're wrapping up or.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this space, and like I said, thank you for being a part of all the other spaces, the Saturday calls, and just continuing to do the work that you do. It's amazing and it's inspiring to see people who are constantly facing their challenges and their battles and whatever moments of denial they might have on a daily basis. And if there's anything that I could say, it's an inspiration to other people. Myself, I'll speak for myself. Like, it's an inspiration for me to see other people do similar work that I'm doing and ultimately know that it's possible to see the other side of it all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and just know that you and your questions and the conversations that we have are leave me deeply enriched and inspired. And there's so many nuggets that I'll take from those courageous conversations uh, that really land and resonate. And I'll think about another situation and from a completely different perspective. And I love that because I think lifelong learning is the bomb.
Hmm.
I think I personally I believe that that's critical,
Yeah.
essential to personal growth and one's own fulfilling life. Yeah. And
Yeah. And
thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation and share about my experiences with not just with denial, but coming out of denial and
hmm
work on those healings and transformations. So
no, thank you. Thank you for being
yeah,
a part of it.
absolutely. Thanks, Oleg. You have a great day with all that snow.